in the panel discussion.
Which changes?
In the panel discussion sequence.
Yeah.
So Sandeep Pai will be the first speaker.
Hmm.
Okay. And then I'll bring you in, and then Jesse, and then lastly Michael.
Sorry, means I am trying to find the agenda. Means I will be the second?
Yeah.
Okay. Sandeep and Montserrat. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, we are all ready. So good evening from India. I think in some part of the world it will be good morning, somewhere it will be good afternoon. So let me just say that you all are welcome to this international webinar on just transition, and also in a way an international book release of the book that we have done on just transition in India, an inquiry into the opportunities and challenges of a post-coal future for the country. So you all are welcome to this webinar. I'm really excited to see a large number of people who have joined us. More will join, I'm sure. We had registration of about 150 people. So I'm hopeful that more people will join and engage in this discussion today. Now, we have a very exciting program today. In a way that apart from what you will hear from us, and I think you will hear a lot of exciting things from us, you will also hear interesting insights and feedbacks from the panelists. And we really have a great panel of people who will bring experience and expertise from different parts of the world, as well as from different sections of the stakeholders. From labor union, from a researcher who is doing his PhD on just transition in Canada, but on India. We have Mike Ward, who will talk about the just transition framework that World Bank is working on. We have Montserrat Neer, who will talk from the labor union perspective. Jesse, who will talk about what is happening in South Africa. And of course, we will bring the perspective of India in this discussion. And of course, we will have an important address from Sonia from SIF, who will talk about the perspective of funders and funding organizations, and how do they see this entire debate of just transition developing in the future. With this introduction, let me give you a short introduction to the work that we have done. And as you can see in the program is first 45 minutes is we have kept for ourselves. We would like to tell you what we have done. We are very proud of what we have done, but we would like also you to know what we have done. So we have kept the first 45 minutes of in which we will discuss our work, the situation in India, and what we have found. And then we have 1 hour and 15 minutes of panel discussion, in which it will start with opening remarks from each panelist. And after their remarks, I might ask 1 or 2 questions that the audiences have put in, or I might ask it from my side. And then in the end, we will have multiple rounds of Q&A to wrap up this entire discussion. So let me start with my presentation, an introduction to what we have done and why we have done and what we have broadly found. And then my colleague Shrestha will detail it out for you. So this is the book, and the book is published. We had a national release of the book. This book was released by the Chief Minister of Jharkhand, one of India's largest coal producing states. And we had participants from coal industry, NGOs, and everyone who participated in the national release. So this is the cover of the book, and this book is available now. And so we will be most happy to provide this book to you. Let me give you the broad overview on how we approach this report. Now, we were very mindful of the fact is that coal is central to India's energy security today. 47% of our primary energy comes from coal. More than 70% of our electricity is generated from coal. Coal also supports railways. In fact, 44% of railways revenue comes from coal. And in fact, the profit share is much higher. And the profit from coal cross-subsidizes passenger travel in India. So there is also a great interdependence between railways and coal. And an estimated 0.35 million people are formally employed in coal. And in fact, that number is much, much higher. If you include informal dependents, this could be in the range of 15 to 20 million people. So there's a lot of people whose jobs and livelihood is dependent on coal. And in coal-rich states, the top 4 or 5 states, coal revenue constitutes anywhere between 5 to 10% of a state's budget. In Jharkhand, which we studied, coal provided 5 to 6% of the entire state budget, which is equivalent to actually the health budget of the state. And then in about 25 districts of the country, where with a population of close to 50 million, coal is the single factor for job and growth. So I think it is very important to understand why there is a reluctance in India to discuss coal in the way coal is being discussed in the Western world. Because in most countries of the Western world, coal is not as central to energy security as it is to India right now. But we think that we must start discussing just transition in India, primarily because of 5 or 6 factors. The first is that renewables are real now. In India, renewables are the cheapest source of electricity, though intermittent right now. But in next 4 to 5 years, we think even 24/7 electricity is going to be very, very cost competitive to coal. So there's a very clear indication that coal power will not be able to compete with renewable going ahead. In fact, the day we did our national release, India had set a new record for solar tariff, which was 2 rupees, which is like no coal plant can compete at this tariff. So it's quite clear where the future direction is as far as energy sector is concerned. The second is environmental cost of coal mining and thermal power plant. Now, on the right-hand side, you can see the map of India. And you can see most coal districts are also one of the most forested districts of India. In fact, the forest cover in coal districts is about 31% compared to the national average of about 22%. And large-scale forest diversion has already happened because of coal mining. In fact, in the last decade, we have lost about 5,000 hectares of forest every year because of coal mining. So there has been large-scale diversion of forest, and therefore coal mining has significant ecological impact, apart from impact on livelihood of tribal communities who depend on forest for their livelihood. And coal-based thermal power plant is the single largest source of industrial pollution in India. In fact, 60% of SPM, 50% of SOx, 30% of NOx, and 80% of mercury emissions in India from all the industrial sectors come from coal-based thermal power plant. And of course, there's large-scale generation of solid waste, which is fly ash. And apart from the fact that we have a good record of utilization of fly ash, still we have about 1 billion ton of fly ash dumped in ash pond across the country. So what you see is that apart from the fact that coal has huge pressure from renewable energy in terms of cost competitiveness, it also has a huge environmental cost, which is never taken into account in terms of valuing the actual cost of power, which is coming from the coal plants. And these costs are now getting translated into the actual cost of electricity. In fact, we have a 2015 standard is much more stricter standard on thermal power plant. And if coal-based power plants start meeting these standards, their tariff is going to increase by anywhere between 0.3 to 0.7 rupees per kilowatt hour. Please understand, the last solar tariff was just 2 rupees per kilowatt hour. So also the pollution control cost of coal-based thermal power plant is going to make them quite uncompetitive going ahead. The last point, in fact, the second last point I would like to make is that most of the coal mining areas suffer from quote unquote resource curse. Now, this is again, you saw the forest map of India, and this is the multi-dimensional poverty map of India. And you just have to overlay coal district with multi-dimensional poverty district. And you find that the large coal districts have double the population who are multidimensionally poor than India's average. So there is poverty, there is pollution, as well as forest diversion and other environmental issues that are there in the coal districts. So there's also resource curse that we need to be mindful of as far as coal mining areas are concerned. And I don't think people of coal districts are going to, accept this reality of resource curse in the future. So we also have to make sure that this entire resource curse is reversed in coal mining areas. And of course, climate change. Coal is the single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in India. We are extremely vulnerable to climate change. In the last 20 years, we have suffered billions of dollars of losses because of climate change. In fact, we have the second highest loss because of extreme weather events in G20 countries. And we risk losing a lot because of heat waves, extreme weather events, impact on agriculture, water, and therefore we have to pay a lot to adapt to climate change. In fact, Ministry of Finance, Government of India has just released a report which says that from now till 2030, we will have to spend about $1.2 trillion to adapt to climate change. This is about 35 to 40% of India's annual GDP. $1.2 trillion going ahead. And this is government's own data. And therefore, it is important that not only India is ambitious about climate change, the world is ambitious about climate change. And India takes leadership in pushing other countries as well to be ambitious about climate action. And the last point I want to make is about profitability of coal mines and unplanned mine closure, which is happening in the country. Coal India Limited, which is the biggest coal producer in the country, the public sector unit, 70% of CIL mines are actually unprofitable. And this is not only about underground mines. Of course, most of the underground mines are unprofitable, but there are also a large number of open cast mines which are unprofitable. So frankly speaking, 70% of small to medium-sized mines are not making money for CIL. And CIL is making money out of few large mines, mechanized mines, which is producing large amount of coal and are making money. So that's the ground reality right now. 70% of the mines are unprofitable. In Jharkhand, about 50% of the operational mines are unprofitable. And if you look at the situation as far as closure is concerned, the Ramgarh district, for example, which we studied, half of the mines were already closed and 2/3 of the operational mines are unprofitable. So though at the national level, coal industry is profitable, CIL is one of the most profitable public sector units. But the moment you start inquiring at the sub-national level, the situation is very different. And at the state level, the situation is different. At district level, the situation is even more different. As I said, if you move to district level, then in Ramgarh, coal mine can close in next decade or 15 years because no new mines are coming and the existing mines are either closed or unprofitable. That's what the situation is. And therefore, though we understand the centrality of coal currently in India's energy and energy sector, as well as for economic growth, I think there are reasons to start thinking about a post-coal future for the country and start planning for it. Because this is not going to be a short-term plan that we can plan and get rid of coal in 5 years. I think we have to start planning now so that we can progressively transition our energy sector and coal mining area over the next 1 or 2 decades. And therefore, this study, we wanted to understand the political economy of coal at the sub-national level, and we chose Jharkhand. We have done an in-depth study of Ramgarh district. And out of all these, we have come out with an indicative just transition framework for the subnational level, as well as at the national level. Let me end by giving you some key takeaway, which my colleague Sreshtha will detail it out for you. There are 5 kinds of dependence we have identified from coal. One, in these districts, coal districts, there is large informal dependence. In Ramgarh, for example, 1 in 4 households were dependent on coal for income. So I don't think we should take it lightly in terms of just look at formal job and assume that the dependence is low. For example, in Ramgarh, only about 7% of the household had formal job with coal industry, but 25% were dependent on coal for some sort of income. But the dependence was largely informal. The second characteristic of dependence is it is a low income dependence. Most of the people who derive income from coal do not earn even $150 a month. So it is a low income dependence. The third characteristic was that it is a spatially concentrated dependence. In fact, within a radius of 25 kilometers of a coal mine, most of the people are, most of the dependence is within a very, very small area, about 25 square kilometer radius of the mine. We found large perceived dependence than actual dependence, though only about 1/4 of the household derived an income from coal. 3/4 of the household believed they depend on coal. So there is a lot of social, and relational dependence that we are not able to understand. Why? People who do not even derive income from coal, who had nothing to do with coal, people who are in agriculture, still believed coal is very important for the district. And the last dependent was constructed dependence. In all these districts, the focus on coal has meant that no other sector has grown. In fact, the singular focus on coal has stymied the growth in every other sector in these districts. So it's almost like a dependence by design that you can see in these districts. So the outcome of the study is that just transition is not in future, it is here and now. In Ramgarh, districts like Ramgarh, coal mines are being closed in an unplanned fashion. In a state like Jharkhand, 50% of coal mines are closed. We need to start discussing just transition now. It is not something which is going to happen in the future. People are getting impacted because of unplanned coal mine closure. The second finding is our just transition is going to be very different than what has been the experience of developed world. For example, Germany. It is all about creating alternative for formal mine workers. That's not the case for us. We have very few formal mine workers who are dependent on coal. In fact, our majority of our dependence is informal dependence. So our just transition is going to be about structural changes and socio-economic transition. And my colleague, again, Sreshtha will detail out, but essentially we will have to think about large-scale economic diversification, industrial restructuring, investment in social infrastructure, mine reclamation and coal mine area development is going to be a major thing. Of the entire geographical area of Ramgarh, 10% is coal mine area. Think about it, the amount of land which is available for coal mines. So coal mine area redevelopment is going to be very important. And lastly, because most of our coal is produced by public sector unit, we have just allowed commercial coal mining. Restructuring of coal sector PSU is going to be very important. I'm happy to say that Coal India is already thinking about moving away from a coal company to being an energy company and investing in renewable energy and other energy sectors. Let me end by saying that we think that as energy transition is happening in the country, we must start just transition as well simultaneously. They both must go together. Otherwise, it will have repercussions for coal mining areas and coal-based industries. So they both must go together. They must go in tandem. We also believe that a well-planned and well-managed just transition will allow India to show strong mitigation commitment and leadership on climate, but also reverse the resource curse and environmental impact that is happening in the coal mining area. And therefore, we very strongly believe that India should take a leadership role in framing the global coal debate. And the last point is, this book doesn't have a concluding chapter. We think that this book will play an important role in starting the discussion and debate with facts and figures on just transition, so that the next step of action and research can take place. So this is what the book is all about. We are really excited to share this book and the findings of this book with you. Ends my presentation now, and I will now request my colleague Shrestha to take you through some of the details which I have highlighted in my presentation. Thank you very much.
Just let me get the presentation up. Thank you so much. I'll just go through the book and welcome everyone once again for joining us today. And I hope you all enjoy reading the book after listening to all of us. So to start with, the way we have set the context of the book and what it broadly covers. So I'll just go through the key question that we wanted to look into through this book. And it was basically what just transition means for India. And there have been a lot of studies around the world on looking at just transition, but there was no such on-ground study from India, which really motivated us to do this work. And to answer this question, we addressed through a two-part approach, I must say. The first, we zoomed into one of top India's coal mining districts to look into the challenges and opportunities of a just transition and to see what a district must do. And then taking the experience from the district, we've proposed the last chapter of the book is about a framework for just transition of India, which also builds on global experiences, as we have done an extensive literature review. Now, we already heard that why we have chosen Ramgarh, and I will not go too much into that. This is a district actually we have been working on for the past 4 to 5 years. And though it is among the top 20 coal districts of India, this is a classic district where coal mine is going down in the past 3 to 4 years, and 50% of the mines are currently closed. And even among the working ones, 2/3 are unprofitable. So it constituted a case where we could actually experiences and showcase what just transition can mean when we talked to people, when we looked into data, and when we tried to build this case. The district's population also gave us an opportunity to understand how rural areas or urban areas can adapt to just transition, because it has a very good mix of both, and it is also a rapidly urbanizing district in many ways. And yes, the 10% geographical area is under the mines, and which gives us an opportunity for economic planning and coal mine area redevelopment, which is specified under various mining laws of India already. Now, to understand the district, we looked into a host of secondary data, and not just the district. In fact, the district has been placed in the book in the context of Jharkhand. And this is particularly related to the coal mining situation, the socio-demographic characteristic of the district, and of course, the political economy of the region. And then we did an extensive primary survey of the district in 2 ways. We surveyed 406 households across the district through a stratified sampling method. It was a random sampling done, so to remove any sampling bias. And then we held stakeholder consultation with over 150 people through focus group discussions as well as interviews. And this group, in fact, is a very representative group which covered communities in the coal mining regions, the local level institution representatives, which we call as Panchayati Raj. We had the district administration, the union members, civil society organizations, state officials, and including public representatives like members of the State Legislative Assembly, as well as the Chief Minister of Jharkhand. When we come to the findings through our extensive secondary data, primary data analysis, as well as the what stakeholders shared with us, 3 key observations have been captured. One is the kind of coal dependence and the extent of coal dependence. The second is that what has been the distributional impact of coal mining in the region? And finally, how do people perceive an event of coal mine closure by economic means, due to economic means, or because of climate change? Now, as we heard that, yes, coal dependence is very significant, and 1 in 4 households earn directly from coal. The interesting part is when we break down these households. The majority of households in these districts are coal gatherers and sellers here. And these people have very low income, and they are actually called illegal workers in many cases, but they constitute a very important component of the coal economy. Then we had a number of laborers, which are casual laborers and contractual workers, and a mix of them. Now, if we put these three together, this is the informal economy in the district, coal economy. And then comes the formal coal mining job. And by formal coal mining job, largely here we mean that the people who have a formal employment with the coal companies. And this constituted, in fact, 1/3 of the informal sector. There was a very clear dependence which was concentrated around the mine. So people living near the coal mines within a radius of 3 kilometers were most dependent on coal mining for income. And as we move away, it nearly dropped to half or less. Now, when we looked into this concentrated, who were these people living near the mines? They were mostly the people who had a formal employment with the coal sector. Here we saw the coal mining, the housings, the hospitals that are provided to the coal employees, and they were there. But the other people, like the laborers or the contractual workers or the coal gatherers and sellers, they were spread across the district, almost in equal proportions. The other significant dependence which we came across was on cooking fuel. Now, this is a classic case of many coal mining regions. And in Ramgarh, it was over 52% of the households that we surveyed were actually using coal as a primary cooking fuel. And the interesting thing is that these people, many of them also had LPG connections, mostly provided by the government. But the reason they continue to use coal is because it is cheap and it is easily accessible. And when we looked into the spatial correlation, this came out very clearly because people who were living near the mines were using coal most as cooking fuel, as compared to when we moved beyond 10 kilometers, which we largely identified as non-mining areas in the book. People were relying on LPG, or even for that matter, who could not afford LPG were relying on firewood. The second important part was the distributional impact question, because this is one district, and like many other parts of Jharkhand, it has 100+ years of coal history. So the general argument has been is that coal has translated to benefit of people. But when we looked into the situation, yes, it had created income opportunities for certain people, but it was limited in certain areas. So what we call it is as pockets of affluence it has created. For instance, if we look into the household income and we looked into income brackets, above 25,000 Indian rupees, which actually roughly translates to $350 per month, that number was very slim. And these were also the people who had mostly coal mining jobs, formally, or were in big businesses. But the majority of the households are earning between $70 to $140 per month. And this group is spread across the district if you look at the blue and gray bands. And it's the biggest section of people. Now, in terms of economic opportunity, the same correlation came out that the most of the opportunities of income or diversity of income exists around the coal mining areas. And within the 0 to 3 kilometer radius, there were business opportunities, there were job opportunities, particularly here we mean white collar jobs, with formal jobs. But if we move away, then what becomes more and more is this kinds of job reduces. And in fact, beyond 10 kilometers, the mainstay for most of the people is agriculture. Not that everyone has big agricultural land holdings, but they're dependent. That's their economic mean. The other important distributional impact was in terms of availability of basic amenities, access to healthcare, access to education. Now, these are key development indicators which are globally accepted as well as used by the government of India for census. And when we looked at it, what basically came out is the access to all of this was overall poor, except for the people who had a formal coal mining job, because coal mining companies like CCL and even Tata, who has a major coal mine in the district, provides for its employees. But for other people, it really did not make a major difference. The reason that happened is because largely, like when we talk of healthcare or education or drinking water supply, it is largely delivered to the general mass by the government schemes. And wherever the government schemes is implemented well, the coverage is good, such as for electrification, because rural electrification is going up. We have sanitation under Swachh Bharat mission, where people have good coverage, but it is falling short in terms of piped water supply, where only 70% of rural household had it, or in terms of primary healthcare resources, where there was a gross deficit of 50%, though coal mining areas are extremely polluted and health conditions are severe. The same thing is with secondary or higher secondary education. Only 16% of schools were offering this, which also limits people's ability to find a good job. And that's the reason also maybe we see so many people are in the informal sector or employed as laborers. Then we moved to the stakeholder perception on coal mine closure and climate change. And one disclaimer, people had very poor understanding of climate change, particularly when we talk to mining communities or most of the PRA leaders. Of course, the officials had a better understanding and they could articulate better. But yes, this palpable sense of perceived dependence was very, very significant. And that is largely because people did not know what else they can do. So this is something what CB just mentioned was as a constructed dependence as well. The other thing, though people feel that, okay, if coal mine goes, I don't know what to do, but they also acknowledge that the coal jobs have been declining over the years, particularly because of two reasons. One was mechanization, which now requires less and less manpower. And the second thing is the outsourcing of jobs. And Ramgarh, this is less, but in all other coal mining districts that we have been working on, actually the outsourcing is a very significant factor for declining coal jobs, particularly secure jobs. So it is making the formal the contractual. Another big apprehension was about that when coal mines are closing down, the formal people are getting employed somewhere else or taken care of. But the people who are falling through the cracks are these informal workers in Ramgarh, which is a very significant mass. But given still always people are very, very skeptical about what happens to them if coal mine closes, particularly they fear there will be a huge rise in unemployment, there will be social stability, they have to move out, there will be out migration, families will be broken and so on. But for the officials, the concern was a little different. This may be a case of this district particularly because coal or mining has been going down. So they feel that revenue substitution for coal will be not the biggest challenge going ahead. But the challenge for them will be that how to diversify the economy because it has become so coal-centric and people have so much sense of a perceived dependence. So this is something that is really an issue of administration and also the political parties. And finally, but despite all this, people are hopeful that something can be done. And I think that creates the opportunity for us to look forward for just transition. Because there is opportunity in the agricultural sector, there is opportunity for fishery, tourism, which has been very, very poorly tapped. And the book details out why these are opportunities, because there is a significant amount of agricultural land, about 40%, but the problem that has happened over years that remains poorly irrigated. So people could not bring it to the maximum potential it can come. Same with fisheries and tourism. And this is something the Chief Minister of Jharkhand himself shared with us in an interview. So these are the areas the young people have demanded skills in other sectors, and education was a big thing that women pointed out because they feel that if they get educated, they can get better jobs and they can be empowered. So this is something which the stakeholders shared with us during the process. So overall, the unplanned mine closure, I'll not go too much into this, but the key risk factor is the district, despite all the declining coal mining, is highly dependent on coal, and about 21% of its GDP still comes from coal mining. And if we look at the coal and the manufacturing sector together, it is actually nearly 40% of the district GDP. And this coal centrism has actually stymied the economic opportunities that can be harnessed in other sectors. And that has clearly translated into this huge perceived sense of dependence that we are constantly talking about. The other major challenge is with the huge proportion of informal workers who do not have security, who do not have fallback options, and the poor social and physical infrastructure just adds to the problem. And overall, for this district, the multidimensional poverty map we have seen for India, for this district, about 32% of the people are multidimensionally poor, means they have poor healthcare, they have poor education, and they have poor living standards. And this is higher than the India average, which is about 27%. Now, taking this picture in mind, the book has offered what the district of Ramgarh can do. But what I'll just highlight here is that the key aspects that we have highlighted in Ramgarh planning can also be translated to other coal mining districts of India as a basic template. And that's why we have called it a district planning matrix. And there are 7 key aspects that the book elaborates on through various sub-matrices. Number 1 is that we need to determine a time frame for just transition. Unless and as soon as we determine a time frame, for example, for Ramgarh 25 years, we can plan a staggered approach of mine closure. Not everything has to close down at once, nor it is advisable. The second thing is there is a clear requirement of bottom-up planning, because if people do not do this, then people cannot engage, there will be apprehension. There must be targeted intervention for creating opportunities for the formal and informal workforce, because their skill levels, their education levels, their ability to move from one place to another is hugely varied. The economic diversification plan, this is interesting, and we have highlighted on 3 key aspects and elaborated on it. One is based on the natural resources of these areas. We have seen the forestry map in various coal districts, and Ramgarh has also a lot of forestry potential, but there is potential in agriculture, horticulture, aquaculture, and all of this. The second opportunity lies with mine land reclamation and coal area redevelopment. This is across India's mining districts, coal districts, which is applicable. The third thing is also an industrial restructuring policy that the state government has to come up. And of course, the district has to follow it through. So these are the economic diversification opportunities we have highlighted. And simultaneously, there is a huge need for improving the social and physical infrastructure. And finally, of course, securing the financial resources to achieve all this. And I'll just touch base on those when I talk of the different actors who can facilitate these things. Now, only one thing I've highlighted this slide because, we are talking of a situation of just transition of funds, of planning and all, but this is something which is readily available with all coal districts of India today, which is the huge issue of mine reclamation and area redevelopment. In fact, the government of India for this, the money for this has been very low for years. And in 2017, the rules have been revised. And there is a financial assurance that has been specified for coal mine closure, which is about $12,500 per hectare for open cast mines and over 2,000 hectares for underground mines, which is quite significant. And for Ramgarh, the district has 10% geographical area under mines, which, if redeveloped well, can attract investments as well as create income opportunities during the mine closure process as well as the post-closure process. Like there can be fisheries activities, there can be horticulture activities, there can be tourism activities on this land. But one thing we need to understand, particularly given the political economy of these regions, is that the ownership and user rights on these reclaimed lands must be determined very clearly. So no one pushes people off their land once they have been given some sort of livelihood on it. And finally, in mining areas, when coal mines close, the coal industry infrastructure can be used as public asset. And this is something the government, the Coal India Limited, and other coal industry, private and public, whoever is operating where, can have a discussion on it, on the mechanisms of that. Then we come to the just transition framework of India. And here I will just briefly show how the Indian experience is a little different, differs from the global experience, but what we can also learn. And in worldwide, what our experiences have shown that unprofitability of coal has been a trigger for coal mine closure. And today, India is also experiencing the same. Since the post-Paris Agreement, what has happened is also just transition policies and planning has gained momentum under the climate treaty. But for India, this kind of deliberation is yet to begin for the reasons of coal centrality that we discussed. The third thing is, this is where India largely refers, is that transition planning in the global north has largely been related to the formal workforce because of the kind of complexion of the workers. But in India, it is about informal and most importantly, unorganized worker or non-unionized workers. And the challenge of them is that they do not have the bargaining power that some of the major pushes have come in the global north from. The fourth thing is, of course, our poor social infrastructure, poverty, and the informal economy requires a socio-economic transitions, which is much more broad-based. And it will require a long-term and deliberative planning involving various stakeholders. And in fact, if we look into the case of Ruhr, Germany, which is championed as the best case, it took over 50 years and the last coal mine only closed in 2018. The financial requirement, again, is excessively huge, and there are mechanisms we have highlighted in the book to start on it. In fact, Germany has earmarked about $45 billion for an 18-year period until 2038 to facilitate a just transition. So these are the challenges we think, but then we have identified how we can achieve it also. Now, taking this, the book highlights on a just transition framework based on 8 pillars. And the 8 pillars, as we talk about, are the national and state government support to facilitate the transition, the diverse engagement and local engagement that will be required, the effective communication strategy with people and with various stakeholder groups, local support systems that needs to be developed, an economic diversification and social security plan, the coal sector transition mechanism, social and physical infrastructure development, and finally, public and private investments both will be required to facilitate this. Now, we have highlighted the various roles of the government at the center, state, and district level because only one person can do it. And the central's roles will be primarily on 4 aspects: is developing a national level policy on just transition, transitioning the coal PSUs through various means. We already mentioned that, and I'll not go too much into that. The mobilizing the finances by providing like tax incentives, encouraging banks and investors, and something like a coal cess, which we can take in the discussions later. And finally, taking a leadership in diplomacy at the UNFCCC. Now, I'll just briefly go to the central roles on the national just transition policy, and this is something we have elaborated on. It can have 5 components. One is we need a coal phase-out plan, and this coal phase-out plan must talk about a coal cap alongside a just transition. And also it has to be thought of at the national level and the state level because various states have various kinds of mines with various kinds of life. So it will require a 2-level process. And aligned with it, we need a coal power phase-out plan. We need policies and incentives for clean energy substitution. And we need revisions and rules related to the coal industry itself, that is related to mine closure or how whether more mines will come up or how transitions can happen. And finally, we need to build on a just transition framework, hopefully in the lines of the parameters that we have highlighted in our pillars.
Srisha, can I request you to now end your presentation? We are running short of time now.
Yeah. So the state level, we are just coming to the last slide almost. So the state level, the main thing will be that to facilitate a broad-based consensus of just transition, and the state's main role currently is to develop an industrial policy around it to move away from coal dependence. And this is something some of the state governments have started on, including the Jharkhand government. And also the to pull in resources that is available with the state government for various plans and programs. And finally, the district level, it is where the just transition planning and implementation must happen. And it must happen through a participatory process. We have already that in place. And last thing, that where the low-hanging fruit lies is the District Mineral Foundation funds. This is a mining fund that has started to come in from 2015, and coal districts already have 2.4 billion in DMFT to facilitate a transition of to build social infrastructure, diversify livelihood, and so on and so forth. Now, with this, I'll stop, and we can take forward in the discussions. And I hope you all read the book, because we elaborated on all of this in much detail. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shrestha, for detailing out various aspects of our work. I think the last point was very important. We believe the communication strategy is going to be the most important thing for just transition. And we are highlighting the perceived dependence issue, because more than actual dependence, the perception that coal is integral in that district has political and social ramifications. And therefore, communication is going to be very, very important. Now, we have a special address from Sonia. And I will now request Sonia to speak about our work, as well as what Children Investment Fund Foundation is thinking about just transition. Sonia oversees SIF's climate portfolio, and she also looks at issues of air quality, industrial decarbonization, F gases, land use, large portfolio. So I'm not going to, talk about her work too much. I think she's quite well known, and may I request you for your intervention, Sonia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and it is an absolute privilege and an honor to be here. And thank you, Chandra, for your very kind and warm welcome. It is a fascinating book. I highly recommend reading it, and I have thoroughly enjoyed that presentation. So insightful, and I think it's really a before and after what the launch of this book is going to do on the dialogue and the discussion on these issues, not only in India, but really globally. So it is really a pleasure to be here today and to speak around with colleagues around the world on this very important topic, because we really owe it to the workers that depend on the mining sector and coal more generally, to meet them where they are, and to be thoughtful in providing a solution and a recommendation for their future and for their sectors. It is one that obviously will benefit the world and other kids that are not in those sectors as well. The Children's Investment Fund Foundation, as Chandra was saying, we are one of the largest philanthropic organizations that focuses on improving the lives of children, which is why for the last decade we have worked on climate change issues. We firmly believe that climate change is the single biggest threat to children, both now and in the future. But it's not only a threat, it's also an opportunity. A low carbon transition and a green recovery is really the opportunity for kids and for children around the world to have good paying jobs in the future, to see themselves in a prosperous world, being able to provide for their families. So I am really happy to see that the book not only addresses the need for the transition for those families and for those children that are today in the sector, but so that they don't see themselves as locked in that pathway either, and they can imagine. I think communication, that Chandra was saying, is critical. They can imagine themselves in a different world with a different job and be excited about it. And those jobs, we know that will only come through low carbon sectors. So we have a just transition is therefore is a difficult one because it's multidimensional. It is not only a technical problem, it's not only a technological problem, it's not only even a social problem. is one of imagination. You know, it's what is it that we can think we can do, and how can we be excited about it. And it is not a problem that is difficult in India or in South Africa or in China. As Shrestha said very well, is one that we are struggling with all over the world. In Europe, there has been some good case studies, but they've been really tough, and we are not done. And they have been transitions done really badly, like in the UK, that have totally decimated communities, and we are still paying the price for that. I visited a couple of years ago West Virginia, and 50% of children didn't live with their parents because their parents were really struggling, and they had either moved away or they were in very difficult circumstances. So surely we cannot underestimate the social damage that a very bad transition can cause, but also a really good transition, well done, well planned, that is very sensitive to where the communities are, can also really open up possibilities that were not there before in a very powerful way. So it is a cultural transition. It is a social transition. I'm also very happy to see that the book really connects the point of being a political economy question. It can lead to global unrest, and it is the leaders, political leaders of these communities see their local GDP connected to that sector. So if that transition needs to be planned from that perspective, because national level GDP statistics of a sector being relatively small in a national level doesn't tell you the story if that represents 90% of the GDP of a local community. That needs to be also realized. So with that, I am very excited to see as well that we can start planning and thinking through what does it mean to do just transition in India. And I think it's, I think this point about informal workforce being nearly 3 times the size of the formal workforce makes it, is a terrific insight as to why planning on just transition and models that of how Germany has done, or how the US has done, or how Spain has done, or how China may be planning, have their limits. And every community, every country, every state in India will have its slightly different situations, and we need to plan. We need to plan for that. I think that it is obviously, as it has been mentioned at the last point of the presentation, how do you finance the transition? It may not be cheap, although obviously the financial upside of doing it well is tremendous, and it will pay many folds the cost of doing it. But obviously there is upfront cost in the planning, there is upfront cost in the transition, and there is upfront cost on the thinking. So what can be done? It is very encouraging to see that there is already some of those funds available, but are they sufficient? Are they well structured? Are they well governed? Do they manage all of the aspects that need to be thought about? And I will, in a way, would love to see the panel later on to start taking on some of these questions. There are examples of just transition funds that have been put in place in other parts of the world. Germany has been referenced, Spain, but also in South Africa, as in the just transition transaction that President Ramaphosa announced a few months ago. So should Jharkhand launch the first state fund that is specifically dedicated to the just transition planning? How could this be funded? Can international funders, philanthropic organizations, development banks, etc., also come in and chip in? How can that become a model that could be replicated in other coal districts in India, in other parts of the world? We are facing this type of difficult transitions in other parts of the world, in Vietnam, in Indonesia, in South Africa, in many parts of China. So, you know, India could become actually a leader and in helping the world leapfrog and reimagine how to do this well. So I'll stop there because I think the panel will be extremely insightful, as the presentation and on the book has already been. But let me just say that as SIF, we are very honored and absolutely very excited to be part of this conversation, to be a supporter and a cheerleader on the side and on the front and from all sides. And you have our offer of support to take what we learn here to other parts of the world, but also take whatever has been learned in other parts of the world that are helpful to India. I'm delighted to be here today, and thanks so much. Chandra, over to you back.
Thank you very much, Sonia. Thank you for the kind words about your support for this entire exercise. I think we are a new organization, and SIF support was extremely important for us to do the kind of work that we have done. So really, thank you for the support. I just want to also say that the point you made about finance is very, very important. In fact, we have done some detailing in the book on finance, but of course, a lot more work needs to be done in understanding how international contribution, national contribution, philanthropic contribution, everything can come together. But we are quite clear that it has to be a convergence fund. We do not want multi-layered funding, which generally doesn't work very well in Indian condition, and I'm sure in many other countries it will be problematic. So thank you very much, Sonia. And as you said, we have a very exciting panel with us. I have introduced the panel, but let me quickly introduce them again. The first panelist is Sandeep Pai, and Sandeep is a doctoral scholar on just transition at the University of British Columbia, and Sandeep is doing his PhD on just transition. Actually, he wrote a book on just transition in Jharkhand, and I know Sandeep because when he was writing his book, he did a online discussion with me, and I had a very different opinion at that point of time, and we had a lot of to and fro that happened in just transition with Sandeep. So Sandeep, welcome, and I'm really excited that you are here and you will provide your inputs. So let me start with you, Sandeep, your intervention, and then, as I said, 7 to 8 minutes we will have Q&A session, and then I'll move to the next panelist. So Sandeep, the floor is yours.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really delighted that iForest has taken up this topic. It is such an important topic, and you have done such a remarkable job. So I just want to congratulate you, Shruti, Shrestha, and everybody in the team for such a remarkable job. I'll just share a short presentation where I will sort of put your work in the global context and the context of India and provide some of the insights from my own ongoing research on this topic. Are you all able to see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. So just to put your book in sort of like both global and Indian context, I will start with the global context. So essentially, I mean, what we are talking about is massive changes in systems, right? Like from fossil fuels to low carbon sources. And so the pertinent question is sort of what happens to livelihoods of millions of workers, communities, and, you know, as world moves away from, let's say, coal in this case. So what we did from a research point of view is we did a systematic review of global literature, mainly academic literature, but we also looked at some policy literature, including task force reports. And we found that most of the studies of, at least till June of, I think it was till July of 2019, were focused on just transition issues in the global North or OECD countries, largely in United States, Australia, lots in Germany, and so on and so forth. And very few studies in the academic world, at least, primarily focused on non-OECD countries, which is interesting because, I mean, countries in emerging economies in Asia account for almost 70% of global coal. And so there was this disproportionate focus of just transition in the OECD countries, which is also understandable because the coal sort of phase out or coal transition discussion has really begun. So this is, for me, one of the most remarkable contributions of this book, that it really focuses on one of the key coal dependent countries and focuses on the Indian coal sector. Now, within the Indian context, I mean, I just have to acknowledge that coal has all sorts of issues. I'm not going to go into the detail as Chandra and Shrestha have gone into those details. But I mean, I was a journalist before sort of I ventured into research, and I have covered the coal sector quite extensively, traveled across the country to different coal mining areas. And it has huge sort of like local environmental implications. But it is a reality that at a sub-national level, and even at, to some degree at national level, coal is tied to India's socioeconomics in certain regions. So from railways, there was a great study by Dr. Tongia and his group, and sort of it showed the railway dependence of coal. It provides revenues to federal government. It provides sort of different kinds of, I'm not going to go into the details, but different kinds of state government revenues. Um, and then there are district level dependence of coal. So that's the one category that one has to think about. The second category is the jobs and pensions. And I will come to pensions here because that's an important discussion that is sometimes missing in this just transition debate. And then the last bit, which I think the iForest study does a great job of explaining, is the sort of small scale legal and illegal mining and the dependence on local industries and fuel for cooking and heating and so on and so forth. So this is sort of three categories of thinking about socioeconomic dependence on coal at different levels of government. Now let's just zoom into the district level. And at a district level, you know, and this is sort of, it overlaps the way this book was structured, but it's also sort of like a way of thinking about direct jobs. And, you know, from a jobs point of view, there are different categories of jobs from direct to informal. And then there are pensioners. So there are actually equal number of coal mining pensioners in India as there are formal coal jobs. And this is a very significant number, and they are completely dependent on the survival of companies like Coal India, which fund their pension. So pension is also a really key factor in many districts. Pensioners, number of pensioners are concentrated in some of the districts, and that's really important. And then the district revenues and district mineral fund that Shrestha and Chandrabhushan talked about. Something that was not significant in Ramgarh, but is really significant in, let's say, other districts, is the spending on corporate social responsibility. There are districts where almost 100 crore is spent, which is sort of a significant amount of money on schools and hospitals and so on. And then the last category is, you know, free electricity. Sometimes there are lots of informal things that happen in the coal bearing areas, including free electricity to people living there, you know, sort of like free industrial fuel. Sometimes Coal India, and many times Coal India and different companies create mixed use infrastructure, such as roads and so on, which is used by the general public, but also by the company. So I am engaged in a very large study collecting data on all districts in India that have any coal sort of like coal jobs or revenues or and so on. And so I'm engaged in collecting this data. So I just want to show you one example of an indirect job. So we estimate that there are about 500,000 workers involved only in trucking. Mind you, most of the coal is now transported via railways, but there is still a significant number of coal that goes via trucking. And that constitutes about 500,000 jobs, and we estimate about 150,000 trucks are involved. So you can imagine the spillover effects of what that means. I mean, it has environmental consequences, but the spillover effects mean there are lots of roadside hotels and dhabas and so on and so forth, which survive on these trucking jobs. And the informal jobs, I think they explain, but basically people scavenge coal in these coal bearing areas. And then, you know, typically one example is that, you know, these scenes are visible in some of the coal bearing areas. The male member of the family will load all this coal in a bicycle and push it and then sort of sell it in the market and make. I mean, just to elaborate on the levels of different kinds of informal jobs. So some people, because the workers, the informal workers are taking this coal and traversing this large hill, people have invested in their motorbikes, and then they just help pull those coal cycle walas up the hill and charge a reasonable amount of money. So this is the kind of sort of informal dependence. uh, just coming to the big study, uh, I collected this huge data set looking at 4 different aspects: coal jobs, CSR spending, coal pensioners, and district mineral fund. And each of this was district wise. And we find that coal's overall spillover effects is in 284 districts. And mind you, this does not include coal-based industries. So I don't have data for jobs related to brick kilns or steel or cement related to sort of like coal-based industries. Uh, and just each district or many districts are quite different from one another. So just to illustrate 2 districts at the different ends of the spectrum, there is Korba in Chhattisgarh, which is the largest coal producing district of 120 million ton, and it has 2 gigawatts of power plant capacity, 15 big mines. We estimate that there are about 3.8 lakh, which is 300,000, almost 400,000 jobs. And there is about 1.4 million CSR. There's lots of district mineral fund, 15,000 pensioners, and so on and so forth. On the other end of the spectrum, you can see a district like Tinsukia, which has small coal dependence. But mind you, I mean, this does not include informal jobs because we are not able to estimate that for all districts. So in a district like Tinsukia, which has some underground mines that have closed, there is a lot of informal job dependence as well. But this only reflects direct and indirect jobs. So it's a small share in a district like Tinsukia. So based on all these parameters, and this is a study these are preliminary results. Based on this study, out of the 285 districts that have some kind of coal spillover effect, either jobs, revenues, or some sort of dependency, we find that Jharsuguda district in Odisha is ranked 1 in terms of formal, in terms of the overall score. And then there is Angul in Odisha, Korba in Chhattisgarh, Dhanbad in Jharkhand, and Ramgarh district, which has been the focus of iForest study, is also among the top 10. So it is a really good case to show it's a template of what are the different kinds of issues one can look at. But just to make it clear, just as an acknowledgement, this is a preliminary result. We will make this whole study public and all the data sets public as soon as it's over. I have 2 more small slides. So just to conclude, all this in the context, I really find that this is sort of one of the most important ground up studies, and it provides a template for future studies to focus on different districts. Like some can take our list, or go naturally to any district and sort of look at low dependency districts that have more power plants, and various districts that have more coal-based industries, and so on, and then focus on that and that district. But iForest study provides a great template to do so. It also provides very deep insights about the scale of the problem. Like, it's not a question of few thousand formal workers and some sort of like district revenue. It's a huge perceived dependence, and it really provides the scale of what we are talking about. It also, if you read the details, and I was privileged to do some review work, it really provides details about the layers of stakeholders involved. And somebody who knows the coal industry, I can say that there's so many layers of people involved with different interests and different sort of like outcomes and financial interests and social interests. And I just think that it provides hundreds of ideas for future work, focusing on just transition research and policy. And here I have written India, but I think it's a solid template Because even in the Western studies that I've reviewed and worked on with colleagues in Europe and other parts of the world, this kind of detailed local subnational analysis is even missing there. So I really highly recommend this book to anybody who's interested in this really important topic. The last slide, from a research point of view, here's some things that I think is extremely important going forward. I think from an Indian context, I think it's important to zoom in on different kinds of districts, lower dependency to high dependency, and use iForest template and modify if it requires, and sort of study different districts to understand and then come up with frameworks. A lot of work so far is very theoretical in the global context, and sort of like, at least the academic work is quite theoretical, and sometimes I wonder, like, what do I even do with that work? Like, it's not relevant. Need to focus on informal jobs. It's really important. Right now, we don't know who will represent them. In some cases, it could be local MLAs. In some cases, it could be somebody else. But it's not like the formal industry, which has like really established national unions and they will be represented well. Really need to understand the social implications of coal-based industries. Coal India has about, just to give an example, Coal India has about like 2,000 odd contracts with different coal-based industries. So you can imagine the scale of sort of like coal-based, and this is fuel supply agreements and things like that, not the e-auction which happens. And the last and most important thing, that one has to not think about Coal India and NTPCs as companies which are fossil fuel-based companies. I think from an outcome point of view, it's really, really important that Coal India and NTPC type companies diversify, and research should aid in thinking about how we can help these companies diversify. Thank you, and I'm so excited for this book, and I highly, highly recommend everybody that you should get this book and read it in detail. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Sandeep. Thank you for all the compliments. It almost looked like that I bought you on the webinar to compliment the book.
No, I mean, it's a great book.
No, thank you very much. And I'm really thankful that you also took part in review of the book, so which was very important for us to understand where we were missing the links in some of the area. But you rightly pointed out that, if you start looking at the layers, then the challenge is much more than what we generally see from the outside. From the outside, it is almost like, we can get rid of coal and then renewable will take over. Of course, renewable will also provide job. I do not want to, in fact, though we understand the challenges, I think one of the key aspects of this book is also the opportunities it provides. And I think we need to balance both. We need to address the challenge, but also the opportunity that exists when you close down a coal mine. Because the dependence is there, but dependence is not of a quality you expect your citizens to have in 21st century. These areas, frankly speaking, I don't want to use the word, but these areas are wretched in terms of socioeconomic conditions, and we need to make sure that our people have basics of life and do well. At least in 21st century, we expect India to provide that to everyone. So thank you very much. I'll come back to you later on, but I just want to now go back to our other panelists from the trade union, and we have Ms. Montserrat Mir Roca. She's a special advisor at the Just Transition Center of the International Trade Union Confederation, ITUC. The floor is yours, Ms. Mir. Your mic.
Say thank you, Chandra, and thank you to the organizers to invite the trade union movement. And it's very, very interesting. I will add my congratulations from Sandeep, because in these processes of decarbonization or phase out coal, we must go to the regions, to the local communities, because are the ones that will be more impacted, and is what the trade unions are trying to do in different parts of the world. There are even unions that are presenting phase out coal plans to the governments to involve them in the transformation of a region, or in that case in India, of a district. And I want to use the opportunity to say that we are beginning to work with the Indian organizations, our affiliates at the ITUC, because as you know, we represent more than 200 million workers around the world. And we are beginning to work with them in an interesting project that will begin next year on innovation reasons for the just energy transition. That means that your book will be a very interesting departure point, because now we are on the process to select the regions that will be object of this project. That will be a long-term project, 4 years, and will begin probably next year. First of all, I want to say, because maybe there are people that don't know how we are working at the trade union movement. The Just Transition Center was created in 2016 and is a center that have the objective to support unions in their phase-out call plans, but to support unions in their just transition plans. That means that we are listening our members and we are supporting them. And the key element for us, the key element is the social dialogue. We are supporting them on get concrete plans for just transition. We are supporting them on to start and develop social dialogue, because not all parts of the world have.
Sonia, may I request you to put your mic a little bit?
Yeah. I say not all the parts of the world have the same architecture of the social dialogue, like Europe or Canada or United States, and that's why we are trying also to push our members to play a key role, to be at the table, because the main sentence that I want to say is if workers are not at the table, probably they will be against of any just transition plan, because they must be part of the solution. They must be involved. And for us, when we talk about just transition, we talk about an inclusive plan that in India also, of course, includes the unions, the employers, the government, the local and regional governments, but also include communities, because as previous speakers have mentioned, not all workers in India are well organized, are affiliated to unions, but the key element of our work is to involve them in social dialogue. That means always unions and sometimes also communities. And what we want to say is that, of course, there will be other sectors that will be strongly impacted in the phase-out call process, like it happens in other regions in the world. And those sectors are also the opportunities to create good jobs, because when we talk about regions that will need to have a process of decarbonization, we will need to take into account all the ecosystem that is around, all the industrial fabric that is around the coal. And we will need also to take into account processes in transport, in the industry. Several of the speakers have mentioned the necessity of to have an industrial strategy, because you cannot close a coal mine and suddenly to have a lot of people without a job. And the other is to use the opportunity to create new jobs in the alternative sectors, because if we talk about tourism, we cannot create bad jobs in the tourism sector, because if not workers, we will not want this transformation process. I want to say that for us, just transition means social protection also, and several of the speakers they have mentioned is very important that everyone has the necessary social protection. And of course, the main objective is to reduce emissions, but also is an opportunity to reduce inequalities and to reduce poverty. Because when we talk about phase-out coal, we talk also about access to energy and energy poverty. That sometimes is one of the key questions. And very often people is saying, but what is for you just transition? Just transition is an integrated process, as I have mentioned, and is defined by the United International Labour Organization. That was one of the first organizations that have set what is just transition with the just transition guidelines, that are the ones that we use when we speak and when we talk with our members. The other question that is very important is that the pillars of the just transition. I have seen in the book that there are different pillars also, and for us, of course, education, skills, and reskilling are key elements, but also human and workers' rights, because you cannot transform a community without to integrate the respect for the human and workers' rights, the social protection, as I have said, and strategic planning, because you cannot go very fast if you don't have with you all the community in this transformation. And of course, social dialogue, I have mentioned before, and I insist, social dialogue is one essential part of the just transition guidelines from ILO. And also social dialogue is an essential part of the concept of just transition that was adopted in the Paris Agreement. That is another one of our guidelines. And of course, also, I want to talk about the Solidarity and Just Transition Silesia Declaration that several countries have committed in Katowice. In this project that we will have in India, we will begin to go in deep regional interventions on social dialogue and stakeholder engagement, the impact and the potential analysis of the phase out call situation. And of course, we will provide transformational measures through the best practices that we have achieved in other parts of the world. And of course, I must say that we will work not only with trade unions, we will work, as in the Just Transition Center, we wish to do with employers, with companies, because are the ones also that they, the governments, that they will have a role to play in the investments. And one of the speakers says before, how to pay the transition. Of course, the transition needs a huge number of investment that must be private and public, and also needs maybe a revision of tax system, a revision of how the transformation is supported. For example, we are asking for a global social protection fund. You know, the ITUC is now fighting at the United Nations level and with the ILO supporting us to have a social protection global fund that will support the more vulnerable people in the transformations that we need to achieve the objectives of the Paris Agreement. And of course, I want to say that this transformation is not easy to do in a short period. We have seen in Germany, we have seen in Spain that there are different timing of transformation, but now due to the COVID and other elements, all the transformation are going faster than in the past. And that's the reason that we need also more involvement. I want to mention, another speaker have mentioned one good example, this El Plan del Carbón in Spain. After a long-term agony of the coal sector, the unions and the employers and the governments, not only the national government, the regional governments, they have achieved the phase out call, the end of coal in Spain, and that was a big achievement because it's a huge amount of investment, but also is a plan for the day after of the last phase out call, that by the end was last year when the last mine was closed in Spain. But also the German phase out call have an important element, as the Spanish one, is that the social dialogue was the key element of this transformation. Because without the employers, formal and informal, without the workers, it's very difficult to have a good just transition. There are a lot of elements that says that if you don't include workers, and I must say that because now social dialogue is not in the best moment in India, and we know that because we are working with our affiliates. But without workers, it's impossible to do the huge transformation that we need. And for that reason, I think that this book could be helpful, but I will include another appendix that says workers' participation as a key element for the transformation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think the book has made very clear point on workers' involvement. One of the question mark we had was that most of the trade unions, most of the workers who are involved in coal industry are actually not unionized, in India, and there is a concern that how their interest will be reflected by the unions is something that the debate. If I may ask you if you could reply in a minute or two, how does your organization represent informal worker? How do you take into account their interest? Because it is not always that the interest of formal worker and informal workers are same. They also conflict.
We know that.
Yeah. So if there is any example that you can quote where you were able to bring on board both formal worker and the interest of informal worker.
What I must say is that in this big project that we will begin next year, we will involve the formal trade unions that they organize the formal workers, but also through the Asia Pacific, ITUC Asia Pacific, we will include also, we will invite the informal workers to be part of the project, is what I must say.
Thank you very much. Now our next panelist is Jesse. Jesse is a senior associate of E3G. It's a climate think tank in South Africa, and she's also a researcher at the University of Cape Town. I wanted to bring, frankly speaking, we were also looking at someone from either Indonesia or China who could look at this issue. But South Africa also is one of the big coal producing nations, and we are delighted that Jesse is participating in this webinar. So Jesse, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me just share that. Does that work? Can everyone see it? Yes. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here, and I just want to reiterate what Sandeep was saying, that this is a really remarkable book. And we'll see as I discuss a little bit the South African context that we're already starting to implement some institutional arrangements to try and manage the transition, while at the same time, some of the research and knowledge and data needs are not nearly as well developed as, for example, what's in your book. So in some ways, people are still flying blind here. I won't go through in a lot of detail the South African coal context or the international and global energy and climate context. What might be interesting for people to know is that half of South Africa's exports go to India. So what happens in terms of energy transition and coal imports in your country will have an enormous effect on transition dynamics and how quickly we need to start managing our economic diversification and planning in some of these regions. So to start, I'm going to talk primarily about Mpumalanga. Mpumalanga is our primary coal mining region. It's province. There are others as well, but it's kind of where 85% of coal mining happens. Incredibly high unemployment levels at 45%, much worse in youth, 58% unemployment if you're under 34 years of age, even higher for women. It's a province that still has in-migration and high levels of rural poverty. It has mining affected communities. There's been mining also for 100 years. Within a 100-kilometer radius is almost all of the coal-fired power stations in South Africa and 85% of coal mining. Extreme air and water pollution. This is an ash heap, lots of energy poverty. So these are coal pickers, which happens either for household use or there's small scale kind of commercial sales, which no one really has a very good grip on. There's extremely degraded land, and there's competition between coal mining and agriculture and coal mining and housing. So as we're starting to talk about economic diversification, there are also these challenges around the dependency that already exists. And of course, the transition has started. So one of the big drivers of just transition becoming such a big topic in South Africa is that Eskom announced this very sudden closure of some of their coal-fired power plants. For other reasons, other related to corruption, there were some large mines that went into business rescue unexpectedly, and there was simply no mechanism in place to support that transition for workers and communities who depended on it. Now the kind of institutional infrastructure is starting to be built up to kind of deal with this. Now it's a super hot political topic. Just transition is everywhere. There's national processes, business-led processes, civil society processes with communities on the ground. There's labor doing their own processes. There's multiple just transition studies that have either started or are just kicking off, funded by the World Bank, AFD, GIZ, ICI, government, UK Pact. Eskom is looking at repurposing and climate finance, the so-called JTT that Sonia mentioned. So how did we get here? Well, the existing closure and the socioeconomic crisis already in Mpumalanga, the region was already ready to start talking about just transition, because there was transitioning and there was very clear crisis both for the unemployed people, communities who can't drink water, you can't drink water in the taps in some of the towns, and then the Eskom crisis. And there was some existing kind of policy architecture. So our National Climate Change Response White Paper, going back to 2011, already spoke about just transition. It was in there because of pressure from unions who've supported this for a long time. It was in our first NDC. And that kicked off a government process to kind of start assessing the implications of climate change, both from a physical and a transition risk perspective in different sectors. So not just coal, we looked, the TIPs who did it have looked across multiple sectors, but because of the fact that this is coming first in coal, we're very coal dependent, so that's our major mitigation area, but also because we've got 12 gigawatts. I know that sounds small if you're in India, but for us, we're closing a third of our coal-fired power plants in the next 10 years. So that happened. That was the one part of the framework. And then we also had a national planning process around net zero, just transition, and other issues over the period 2017 to 2019. So that National Planning Commission process had high-level dialogues, provincial workshops with communities, civil society, government, and sectoral angles. South Africa subscribes to the ILO guidelines. We support that strongly, but we also, the NPC also says that we see a just transition to a low carbon, climate resilient economy and society as one that also includes defending and protecting the rights of the most vulnerable, including women, children, people with disabilities, those that are poor, and the working class. So very explicitly focused on justice. And the conclusion there was that we need to focus on some hotspots. One was coal in Mpumalanga, and one was the Free State because of drought causing impacts in the agricultural chain. The NPC is now formalizing into something called the Presidential Coordinating Commission on Climate Change, which will kick off next year and will coordinate climate ambition and just transition. So that will be a high-level social dialogue. It will be unions, civil society, business, and government. The process from our white paper was something called the National Employment Vulnerability Assessment and something called the Sector Jobs Resilience Plans. And these essentially examine dependency and assess vulnerability in a variety of sectors, looking at human, financial capital, skills, workers in the value chain, much like your excellent book has already done for some districts. It didn't have modeling, so there's still, and one of the things they've identified is that we don't actually have enough data on something. So we don't really have that much information about workers, their age, their skills, and we don't have a lot of information about livelihood dependencies or livelihood strategies of communities in some of these regions. And so that perceived dependency is very, very high, but it's not, there isn't actually an evidence base to work out exactly how big it is in some places. The formal statistics, yes, but not informally. The SJRPs suggested a whole lot of interventions in sectors, in sectors, and of course, and alongside that, social protection measures. We need active. It's the kind of what's come out of it is we need active labour market policies that will support worker transition, and there needs to be a lot more further analysis. So in coal, what they've done is look at coal waste beneficiation, mine repurposing and rehab, and putting renewable energy in Mpumalanga. It's not the best renewable resource in the country, but it's close to grid infrastructure, it's close to load, and can be at least one pillar of trying to manage a just transition for workers. For workers, and also just to flag, it's not only the existing coal workers, but very much that there's almost 60% unemployment for youth. So this is really an economic diversification challenge for the economy. It's very undiversified. So this just shows you, this is the province. These are local municipalities, and coal is 21, 44, 35, 33, and 22% of GDP of GVA in those areas, as well, of course, electricity. These are the coal plants, and in this case, this is our coal to liquids plant where we gasify coal. So extremely high levels of economic dependency in some areas, and in particular in these district municipalities where all of the coal plants are, they're going to close soon. Alongside that, obviously very high levels of formal employment. So in each of these local municipalities, coal employment can go up to 26% of the municipality. And there's important other elements to this, right? Is when you start to, it's not just saying, oh, we're going to lose so many jobs, but also understanding dynamics around the labor force, their wages. You know, if you move out of coal mining, what are you moving into? What are the wage implications of that? What are the reskilling? Who will coordinate it? How will that look? But also that coal miners typically drop out of the workforce very, very, very young because they're sick and they can't work anymore. So what is the plan for older workers? I'll skip that. In the province themselves, they're working now to include Just Transition Chapter explicitly in their climate change strategy. Some of the municipalities are also undertaking their own climate change and just transition planning processes and assessments, looking at how they can incorporate just transition into municipal planning processes. So what does that mean for energy planning, for household poverty, for infrastructure investments? Other provincial responses include, for example, an existing stakeholder engagement and planning process, the Provincial Climate Change Forum, and potentially a kind of more focused group that will work with better information sharing in a slightly smaller way. But of course, what's really important is there needs to be ongoing engagement with communities. The economic development planning arm of the province is incorporating just transition into their development planning. They've just started something called a green economy cluster, which will look very much at green economy developments. Some of that will be around mitigation, but also other things. There's existing initiatives on mine, water, bioenergy. And I think this is really important because we talk about getting finance, but what in my experience as I'm talking to bankers and projects and things, one of the problems isn't that there isn't enough money, even though we're a poor country too. It's that there's no entity that can take that finance and match it to projects. Who actually implements these things, you know? Eskom is obviously core to this. It's very, very important, like NTPC, that they take this on. And they're also looking at how to repurpose some of their power plants and bring in finance to accelerate the decommissioning of some of their coal plants in return for concessional funding. I won't go through all of this, but what we've started to do is try and say, what are the exact kind of intricacies of a region and what can it be competitive in? So in our case, we can put renewable energy infrastructure in Mpumalanga for the reasons discussed. We have existing capabilities around hydrogen with one of the large other entities. But you can see some of these ideas are empty. So what do we do about household energy? How do we replace coal? How much are households actually using? People don't know. What about other kinds of investment in economic diversification? So can we put renewable energy manufacturing in these regions as part of the just transition planning? What about other manufacturing? What are the competitive advantages? You know, you need a kind of place-based assessment of each coal region, essentially. Agriculture is a really important opportunity, but again, it's competing with coal. And so sometimes actually kind of horticulture exporting companies are closing down because there's mining taking their land. There's obviously, and for us, and maybe similar to India, it's very important to look beyond just coal. You know, we need education and literacy programs that address skills for youth. Rehabilitation and restoration of ecological infrastructure, because there's degraded land and there's degraded mining land. Food security is something that communities themselves raise all the time. It's not something that everyone sitting in capitals is thinking about, but how do we actually create a part of a just transition plan that makes sure people meet their basic nutritional needs? Cool, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessie, thank you very much. Jessie, has South Africa developed a time frame on coal phase out?
So I think this is one of the challenges, is that we've got an electricity plan that shows coal phase out to 2050, and it's a bit unclear if it's going to be accelerated because it's not really compatible with what we've said we're going to do, which is we're going to work towards net zero by 2050. But that hasn't translated into any planning around mining. And mining is much more fragmented. It's privately owned, and there's 4 or 5 big companies and then a lot of small companies. And that's actually where most of the workforce is. There's 90,000 coal miners versus 15,000 in power plants. And there's very limited coordination around that process. And I think that's actually more important because people don't know that mines are closing. In fact, this happens anyway. People don't know that mines are closing until it's too late. So as assets are already shutting, there's not good closure planning. And now we're looking at potentially a much more accelerated closure process. And I think that committing to that phase down is a really important first step, because it allows you to understand who's going to be impacted, how many people, how do we plan, how many people might need early retirement, who will need to be redeployed, etc., etc.
Okay, thank you. Our last panelist is Mike Ward. Mike is with World Bank. And in fact, when we were doing research, Mike, I think the World Bank document on just transition framework was a very important document for us to understand from the perspective World Bank is looking at just transition. Some very interesting ideas are there in this World Bank report, and I would recommend people to also look at the World Bank report on just transition. Obviously, all the pillars that the World Bank report discusses might not be equally applicable everywhere, but nevertheless, it's a very interesting observation in terms of, and the most interesting thing I found, in fact, was how World Bank is talking about agencies for mine closure. We need dedicated agencies which will look at mine closure, because right now mine closure in India and in fact across the world is left to the companies themselves. And in fact, we have large cases of abandoned mines. Companies are quite willing to forfeit their deposit. We have some amount of money that they need to deposit. They're quite happy to forfeit that deposit and leave the mine abandoned. And therefore, how do you get mine reclamation and coal area redevelopment is something very interesting that we found in the World Bank report. So Mike will talk about the World Bank work which is happening on just transition. So Mike, the mic is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, and Chandra and everybody, thank you very, very much. It's a real privilege to be part of this discussion, and also really to see the kind of parallels that are developing across the various kind of streams of work that are going on around just transitions. And I think that the affirmation that the new IFRS Just Transition book gives to many of the findings that are coming out of the work that we're doing. So maybe just to say that the climate investment funds, so as opposed to the children investment funds, and I think that between children and climate there are a lot of overlaps. But the climate investment fund really is trying at the moment to explore how just transitions can be achieved alongside the sorts of deeper transformational change that will be necessary to support addressing climate change, sustainable development, equity in our societies. And so what we're doing is really trying to explore through the work that the Climate Investment Funds has been doing with multilateral development bank partners, and to try and understand almost retrospectively what we can learn from the various pieces of work that are going on. The work that we're doing is focusing significantly on the global south, mainly because there is quite a lot of work already in the global north, and I think that the IFRS book contributes enormously, as does the kind of work that Jesse was sharing around South Africa. So essentially, we've done 2 case studies, one in South Africa, we're just finalizing one in India, and really trying to learn our way into just transitions rather than kind of do a retrospective evaluation of the work. And I think that what's coming out of this work, really working with the Climate Investment Funds and the Center for Strategic and International Studies, is across the many different approaches, definitions, orientations, interests in just transition, are some very broad kind of, I suppose, dimensions of just transition. The first one speaks to procedural justice, its issues of social inclusion, and really importantly, who gets to decide how these just transitions will play out. The second dimension is distributional justice, and this is really around who gets what in the transition processes. So just to run through and to make some links to the work that is in the IFRS book, I think that this notion of recognition is absolutely key. I think it takes place at different levels. At the international level, India has been very kind of vocal and central to having its very low historic emissions, the very low historic emissions across the global south, actually, and very low per capita consumption of coal. recognized, and therefore issues around common but differentiated responsibility. So these kind of international recognition issues are important. They're also incredibly important at a local level. The new book talks about kind of non-referenced people or people that are not kind of recognized and taken into account in the transition processes. And this work that we're trying to do on opening up this dimension of recognition, trying to find tools to do it, is a key part of the just transition, as is empowering people to participate in ways that can actually shape outcomes. And here again, there are, I think, for example, in India, big issues around land, the need to allow people who rely on the land and rely on forests to participate and to influence what is happening there. And it happens across both coal, the fossil fuel industries, as well as new renewables, where we see some of the kind of ultra mega solar parks really not allowing people to participate in the discussions around land, and hence court cases and delays and frustration in the rollout of renewable energy as well as coal. Governance issues, of course, and I think that is picked up well in the book, the need for governance structures at national level, at state level, and at district level, and an integration across them. And I think that here the multilateral development banks, in the work that they've been doing, working with state partners, national partners, have opened up some of those kinds of cross-communication, cross-sectoral communication, and what the Climate Investment Funds calls a programmatic approach. In terms of distribution, present impacts obviously huge, and Chandra, I think, really outlined all of the drivers of a just transition process, which means that in all of the places that we're looking at, the just transition is happening, or a transition, not necessarily a just transition. The transition is happening much faster than anybody's planning for. It's likely to be quite chaotic at the moment, and therefore inherently unjust. And so this kind of present moment is an important one to engage with. Issues of access, energy poverty. I think that the kind of willing household electrification in India, the percentages given there often obscure the fact that many households either have unreliable energy, or they can't afford the electricity that is provided, and therefore still rely on many other forms of heating and lighting. And then I think this notion of restorative justice is absolutely key. In many of the coal mining areas, forests were destroyed, forest livelihoods were destroyed, and the marginalized communities that were impacted as coal expanded and coal mining and power expanded are the same communities that may well be negatively impacted as coal kind of retracts. And so the need for, I think, multilateral development banks, for climate investment funds, for national funds, to get in and to restore, to use some of those budgets to restore ecosystem services, to restore agriculture in areas is a notion of restorative justice. And then this notion of depth of transformational intent, I think that increasingly we're recognizing, and I think the labor unions bring this very powerfully, is that we need to question whether the current social and economic systems can actually transform enough to sustain just transitions, to sustain transitions that support much more sustainable development and much greater equity in the world. And then, of course, this recognition that these just transitions and transitions are going to happen across geographic space. I think Jesse's example of the import of coal into India from South Africa is just one example of those kinds of geographic spaces. Of course, the other ones are things like renewable energy developing in one side of the country while coal impacts are happening on another. How do we manage some of those potential inequalities across geographic areas? And then the extended time horizons, the recognition of historic emissions, current emissions, future emissions, and of course, future, some people refer to it as the children of all species for all time. So these long time horizons. And what we're doing then in that work is using a relatively simple 4x4 matrix, just helping us to think through. And when I say us, I mean the climate investment funds, the multilateral development partners, other partners that we're working with in this just transition process, and to start to try and understand how it is that we can kind of push our ambition a little bit, our transformational intent, from a kind of very reform, small moves to a much more expansive notion of empowerment, and a much broader notion of what the distributional impacts will be. And so that's the work that we're working on. It's great to see the iForest book. I think it'll be a really important contribution and a granular case study that will help us to ground some of these big ideas and understand how to take them forward into the work that we're all doing. So Chandra, thank you, and to your team for making a huge contribution to the field and for involving the climate investment funds in this discussion.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much. And, the idea of distributive justice is very close to the heart of Shrestha. Shrestha kept talking about this issue that, the local community has already suffered because of coal mining, and they will suffer because now of unplanned closure of coal mines. So this entire idea of distributive justice is very, very important in the framing of just transition. We do not want them to suffer twice. They have already sacrificed a lot to light our houses and run our industries. So thank you very much, Michael, for this important contribution. We are running short of time, so I will do a round of Q&A with all of you, and then we will wrap up the session. And I will, I want to take finance as one of the issues and take the feedback of all the panelists on financial issues. Now, it is quite clear to us, if you look at the Western world and the way the amount of money they have allocated for just transition. Germany, for example, is talking about tens of billions of dollars to take care of thousands of workers. So the cost they are estimating in just transition is actually quite humongous. And that's where I think the issue of international support and funding, I'm also quite clear that a lot of money will come from the national and state and local sources. But from the international perspective, how do you all feel that a coalition on just transition to have support for developing countries or countries who are highly dependent on coal and will find it very difficult to phase out, how does the international system help them? And let me start with Michael and then move to the rest of the panelists. How do you see the international financing growing in the field of just transition?
Chandra, thank you. And I think that the work that's been done on co-benefits in India is an important starting point for some of this discussion. It's to recognize that in areas of enormous poverty, inequality, unemployment that we have in many of our countries, I'm being South African and have seen it firsthand here, that the investments are going to need to address multiple issues at the same time. And so the financing that we put into, for example, ecological infrastructure and unlocking payments for ecological infrastructure need to be linked to things like mine rehabilitation and the restoration of economies for peoples whose livelihoods might have been based on forests and have now been destroyed, for example. Similarly, I think that the financing into the kind of economic diversification that we need in these areas, they're very concentrated areas. We know where they are. We can put quite a lot of money into them, enough to make a difference. And I think that it's going to take concessional finance to unlock some issues that might be too risky at the moment, or to unlock, for example, transmission infrastructure. But it's also going to take significant public investment and private investment. And this programmatic approach, this cross-sectoral dialogue, and finding spaces to have those dialogues with key role players is going to be key in that process.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Ms. Mead?
I think that one of the more relevant parts of the just transition in India will be to protect all these workers that are around the coal, but they are informal and they are out of the rule of law. They are not protected by the law in terms of social protection, in terms of regulation of the sector, because of course we can work with the unions in regulate the sector through collective agreements. But if there are an important part of workers that are not, that's why I'm convinced and I'm sure that trade unions, formal trade unions, are now engaging in this transformation, because they know that in the coal sector that is essential. If they not try to protect also those workers, the phase out coal in India will not be a success, because if you have one part of the population that is not covered by any scheme of social protection, and I know that, for example, there is SIBA that is also working with women in some regions that are informal groups of women, that they are attracting to the more formal kind of organizations to try to protect them. And the question is how to finance. I think that there are a lot of money in the world that needs to be placed where is needed. For example, in this project that I was talking, that is a project that we will have in consortium with ILO, the German government, and other organizations like the Wuppertal Institute, we will dedicate the funds to prepare and to be on the ground with the unions and also with the informal workers, to put the key element of the social dialogue and inclusion in the transformation.
Okay, thank you. Sandeep, any ideas or international funding?
So, I mean, I think I will take that question in two parts. The first, I think, part is like for us as researchers and like people like your organization and others, we really need to articulate what we are asking for in terms of money, like, or finance support. So I think from works around energy modeling to various ways in which, one can create baseline studies and articulate, okay, this is the amount of money we are looking at for certain kinds of outcomes. And then I think, I mean, one is the internal sources, whatever from district mineral funds and others. The other thing is that, to me, I don't know, I cannot emphasize this more. Coal India has to flourish and diversify. Like, I think that is a really important aspect of financing, because it's the industrial powerhouse, and depending on how it diversifies, it can attract certain investors. It can sort of live. So that's the second aspect of this. The third aspect is, I think, the way this debate is shaping up, and your kind of studies and the work Mike is doing and various other people, I think even in the international community, among investors and pension funds and all, and I've been speaking to a lot of different people in different contexts, they are thinking about incorporating just transition as part of their funding, among things like ESG funding and various other, or corporate social sort of responsibility and various other things. So I think it'll be a mix of all these different internal, Coal India plus NTPC plus the global. And I mean, frankly, once we have some kind of assessments on this, I think India should go and ask these funds in climate negotiations, right? This is something important, and where it'll come from, and this is the kind of shortfall that'll happen. And in my view, India should be really clear that, look, if we are phasing out coal, as everybody in the world wants and is required, we need this kind of money. Okay, I don't know Sandeep, if that answered your question.
No, it's a wish list, because I also know how much money can come from UNFCCC and other platform, but that's a discussion. I think finance is going to be an important component of discussion on just transition. Jessie.
Thank you. I mean, I just want to reiterate, of course, we need to phase out coal as the developing world also more rapidly because of the unfair use of fossil fuels. I don't think we can also be expected to shoulder more costly burden in doing things more quickly. I want to talk just very briefly about transition finance. And Mike and I were on another webinar last week talking about this. And one of the ideas that's been proposed here is, how do you get Eskom to pivot? So how do you get a Coal India Limited or an NTPC or a PLN to change? It's more complicated here because Eskom is in a huge financial crisis. But one of the things that's been people are looking at is whether they can get the concessional finance to commit to a slightly more rapid phase out of their coal plants, and also use some of that concessional finance to create a just transition fund for the region. Now, that could be one thing, but we're going to need a whole lot of facilities to do economic diversification at different scales, because at the moment people have ideas for projects, but they can't get them funded, or there's small business all over the country. That's most of the South African economy, which can't access the kind of finance that it needs to grow. And then we talk about economic diversification and restructuring and these kinds of things, but some of those problems already exist as part of a development challenge, and that's also part of just transition. And I'm not sure how we resolve it yet, but it's much more complicated, I think, in developing countries than in developed countries. Frankly, we have less money, but we also don't always have the institutions to manage those processes as we might need to. Thank you.
The debate 10 years back was, how do you finance energy transition? How do you get renewable energy, and how do you get battery technology? And that used to be the big debate. Over a period of last decade, we have seen how, due to innovation and large scale implementation of renewable projects, they are becoming slowly cost competitive. I think in this last 10 years, because we did not look at what would be the cost of phase out, we are at this point where we are struggling on how do we. So the challenge today, frankly speaking, as we were in Jharkhand and discussing with people, my observation was very clear. The challenge is not technology. And I think Sonia also made that point. The challenge is not that we will do energy transition. We will do energy transition. The biggest challenge is how do you convince people to shut down coal mines? Okay. And build political consensus around it. Because what will stop closing of coal mine is not that renewable is cheaper. Everyone knows renewable is cheaper. What will stop continue coal mine is the political consensus that we need coal to continue because there's nothing else that we have. So I think financing, communication are some of the pillars where we will have to really flesh out and understand how do we move ahead. I'm also not worried, frankly, about broad governance architecture, because I think in most countries, if there will be chaos, but governance can be sorted out. I mean to say, we can think about different mechanism to implement just transition projects. But finance and communication is going to be very important, and so will be the bottom-up planning and involvement of everyone, including worker, formal and informal, and everyone to be part of. They must feel that it is something that they own it, that they have been part of this transition. Otherwise, it's going to be really, really difficult, considering the layer of dependence that exists in coal mining areas. Great. We had an excellent panel and a great discussion. Let me, in the end, thank my colleague. Shruti is there. Shruti has been part of this team, an integral part of work that we have done. Shrestha is there. I want to thank my colleagues at iForest for giving their support in doing this entire work. I'm thankful to all the panelists. Let me do a sales pitch. If you are in India, you can get the book on Amazon, and and you can buy that book. I'm not going to give you a book free of cost. And if you're outside India, you can write to an email which is there in the chat box, which is contact@cr.org.in, and we will tell you how to send us money, and then we will send you the book. So thank you very much, and really delighted that you all participated. I'm really happy that we had a lot of people who attended this meeting. I'm hopeful that they have taken back some interesting information and knowledge out of this webinar. Thank you very much. Good night from India, and wherever you are, have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Have a nice evening here in Barcelona. Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Cheers all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Shall I end the webinar?
Yeah, and then we can